Hello everybody and welcome to another guide for Marvel Heroes. This is going to be about a system that, similarly to the terminal system, has been split into red and green difficulties. I'm going to be talking about the rating system, which, even though it's been around for a decent amount of time, a lot of people still don't understand. They don't know even what level they need to be, they don't know what kind of gear they need, how the bosses work, or anything along those lines. So in this video, I endeavor to answer all of those questions and hopefully a couple others just to get people on a base level to know what's going to be happening. The way this is going to work is it's going to be split into several parts. The first one is going to be all about gear. The types of gear that you want to have, how you want to modify your gear, all of that kind of stuff, regardless of what character you're going to be using. The second part is going to be about the raid itself, where I'm going to talk about the individual sections of the raid, including the first part where you're just defeating some random bad guys before you get into the bosses, and then go by the bosses one by one, talking about the specific mechanics they utilize, how to get around them, the specific attacks that they use, if there's anything special about them, and things along those lines. So with that, I hope that you'll enjoy this video, and we'll go ahead and get started with my introduction.
Uh-oh. The portal's coming. No. No, 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 no! No, I'm not on the portal team! No! Yay! It missed me! Yay! Oh no, I'm by myself. I'm gonna die! Talking particularly about green raids, there are a couple of general tips that I wanted to go over. The first thing is that you do not have to have the best in slot for every single thing that your character has. You do want to have every single slot filled, but again, you don't have to have the best. One thing that you are really looking for though is damage. One thing that really tends to kill off raids is when people cannot output the damage required to take down the bosses in time. That said though, it is often a lot more important that people understand how the bosses work, what the mechanics are, and more importantly, how to beat them. But with all that said and everything aside, I'm going to go over a couple of things that raid leaders tend to look for in your gear. There are a couple of different categories that I'm going to split this into, and the first one is going to be generally the gear slots 1 through 5, along with the artifacts and a little bit about the Uru Forged, followed by the legendary item, and then last but certainly not least, a little bit about your costume. Starting off with the gear slots 1 through 5, artifacts, and Uru Forged, the first thing that I want to note is that you essentially need to get these items modified. The way that you do that is over here at the Enchanter. Now, one thing that I really want to stress once again is that you do not need the best of the best stuff, but what you do need to do is make the best of what you have. For the gear slots 1 through 5, ideally you want to enchant them if you can afford to. You can see here on the left sides there are 2, 3, and 4, and then 1 and 5. Those represent the gear slot numbers that you can use those specific enchantments for. For the slots 2, 3, and 4, they're typically utility stats. Things like health, spirit, defense, additional XP, etc., etc., stuff like that. Normally you'll see health and spirit in those slots. For the gear slots 1 and 5, that's where your damage comes into play. Remember, you want high damage, and this is how you get it. You've got physical, you've got mental, energy, etc., etc. The list goes on. Okay? That's for the gear slots 1 through 5. Again, not the best, but making the best of what you have. Second, the artifacts. The artifacts get blessed, and there is no reason for you not to, because you earn the ability to bless items as you level up. The reason being that these cost Odin marks, which you get from legendary quests, shared quests, daily logins, and several other minor events and things like that. More often than not, you will see either Hela blessings or Frigga blessings recommended by builds. Hela because it gives brutal strike chance, which gives a lot more damage per second, or DPS, and the second one, Frigga, is primarily for summoning characters. In other words, people like Loki, Squirrel Girl, and Rocket Raccoon who use pets, because it increases your pet's damage and their health, which is wonderful. Alright? And again, you earn the currency, the Odin marks, as you level up. Last but certainly not least is the Uru Forge, the rune words. These are the things that raid leaders tend to look at a little bit less, simply because they're not as required and they're a lot more expensive. The major thing is that you want to have a level 50 version and get whatever you can afford whenever you can afford it. So with that, the biggest reason that you want the artifacts at the very least to be blessed is because it really shows the dedication you put into this particular character. It costs a lot of resources to bless all of your artifacts, so it shows them that you played the game a decent amount to earn that ability, and you somewhat at least know how to deal with the items. So with that, we're going to move right into the legendary item next. Legendary items are obtained in a couple of different ways in Marvel Heroes. One of them is through specific events that the developers put on, but the problem with those is that they tend to be more for leveling up your characters and farming for items, so increasing things like rare and special item find. What you really need to do is go over here in Asgard to the legendary item vendor. These legendary items cost you 300 Odin marks, so including that with the 4 blessings for your artifacts, that's a total of 700 Odin marks to fully deck out your character for the raid battle. Now you can see there's a decent number of them, and all of them have different capabilities. One very important note is you actually have to give these items experience. In other words, you need to play the character more and more and more to rank up the legendary item and make it better and better. Typically, raid leaders, particularly for the green raids, will be looking for rank 3 legendaries because it shows the dedication to the character, the time that you put in, etc, etc, etc. Again, just showing somebody that you don't know that you know at least somewhat about what you're doing with your character. If you are uncertain about which legendary item to get, then first off, check the builds. See what people recommend you get, but if you don't want to do that, then Gungnir is always a decent catch-all that anybody can really utilize because it gives you straight up critical hit and critical damage. It's a really, really good, solid item, and again, increases your damage, which is really what you want for raids. So with that, I'm going to move right into the last little bit here, which is your costume. The costume for your hero is something that is often overlooked when you're gearing up. The reason that it's overlooked is because a lot of people really don't know about it, but it can really make the difference between living and dying and succeeding and failing in a raid. There are several different modifications that you can give your costume, chief amongst which are the graded affixes. They are graded 1 through 4, with 4 being the most powerful, and you can get defensive or offensive for each of them. Most builds will tend you to have all offensive because again, you want that heavy damage. Normally you'll see things like critical damage, sometimes you'll see critical hit, so you actually gain more crits and all of those kinds of things. The other major aspect for your costume is the costume core. You can see here that in the white text, the third line says resulting costume equipable at level blank. That is one of the most important things. You want a level 60 costume core. And these affixes actually give you a great deal of survivability. I know it's a bit of a change from the damage centric, but this is things like life every time you hit an enemy, regardless of how it is. You get invulnerability when you use a med kit. You gain a lot more of your health and spirit when you use a med kit, things along those lines. Massive differences in survivability, and very, very important for raiding. It's very easy to put on. It's underneath all of the affixes here where it just says add core to costume. You just need a level 10 crafter, and they'll be able to slap it on whatever the appropriate costume core for your particular character is. So with that, we're going to go right on ahead and talk about the raid itself, starting off with the beginning area along with some general info, and then diving directly into each one of the bosses and talking about them individually. The first things that I wanted to go over were just general informational tidbits about the raid itself, specifically with regard to a comparison to other game content, and also in terms of just how the raid functions, primarily focusing on the bosses themselves. So, first and foremost, the raid area itself requires that you are level 60, and if you really want to pass the content, you need 10 people for it, and it makes it much, much easier. The second thing is you will more often than not have a raid leader, somebody who is in charge of telling people when and how to split up the teams, where to go, when to do it, all of that kind of stuff. Very, very helpful just to have somebody in charge who knows what's going on, knows what they're doing, and knows how to win. Well, other than that, the bosses themselves are pretty distinct from any other bosses in the game. As I already mentioned, one very important aspect is for every single boss, the party will be split into two or more pieces. Again, that's up to the raid leader typically as far as exactly how to do that, but that's just one of the mechanics that you'll need to do. One of the other very important things to be aware of is that all of the bosses have countdowns. Now, there are actually two different versions of this. One of them is an actual literal countdown, most often from 10 minutes. This is a countdown to the enrage state. Once a boss reaches the enragement state, all they do is start doing one-shot attacks that instantly kill all of your heroes. That leads into the secondary sort of limiting factor of the bosses, which is just about the number of lives that you have. Each time you go into a boss battle in the raid, you have a total of 30 lives that you can lose amongst all of the heroes. If you lose 30 lives, you are taken out of the raid. While there isn't anything inherently bad about losing a raid in that way, you do lose time and you have to go back again and all that kind of stuff. Now, you may have noticed that as I've been talking about all of this, I'm in the initial part of the raid. For this, it's a very simple thing where you have to track down 10 special mobs, called the sentries. Once you track down all 10, the gate at the end of this area will open up and lead into the rest of Muspelheim with the awaiting bosses. The first boss encounter in the Muspelheim raid is what is commonly known as the Twins. This is made up of Lord Brimstone on, I guess you could say, the west, and Lady Hellfire on the east. The party is going to be split into two groups of 5 each, and each group is going to start at one or the other. Once you're there, you simply start by just wailing on the boss. You need to watch out for the area of effect telegraphs that each boss has, and some of their basic melee attacks of slamming and stomping and things of that nature. In addition, you also have vents on the ground that shoot up fire that can greatly damage you as well. The particular shtick for these two bosses is that as they're attacking you, they begin to stack debuffs on your characters. If you press period on your keyboard by default, then you can look at the debuffs and you can see how many that you have stacked thus far. What's going to happen is at approximately 40 debuffs stacked, then your leader is going to say to switch. When this happens, you're going to move in a clockwise motion around the arena. So what's going to happen is if you're at Lord Brimstone on the west or the 9 o'clock side, you're going to go up and around to the 12 o'clock, over to the 3 o'clock where Lady Hellfire is, and if you started at Lady Hellfire, you're going to go down towards the 6 o'clock position and then up towards the 9 o'clock position. As you go, you're going to run into yellow elite mobs. These mobs drop buffs that negate the debuffs that the bosses give you. And essentially what you're doing with that particular motion is you're picking up the buff that negates the debuff for the next boss that you're going towards. After you do this first movement when you're fighting this boss is when you will typically use your ultimate power. Since the timer on this is 10 minutes, then you'll have plenty of time afterwards to get your ultimate back once the fight is over, and you'll be able to use it on the next boss. The special attack utilized by the twins are two similar area of effect attacks that are telegraphed by either red arrows pointing away from your character or green arrows pointing towards your character. What these indicate is exactly what the arrows are showing. If you get the red arrows, that means get away from your friends and it will mitigate the damage. If you have the green arrows, it means get together with all of your characters and it will mitigate the damage amongst all of them. This particular one is very, very useful if you have characters that use a lot of pets. For example, Squirrel Girl and Rocket Raccoon, because for the green arrow one, it is also spread amongst the pets as well. As long as you're diligent in getting the buffs on the way to the next boss for the twins fight, and you obey the directions of the arrows, there shouldn't be too many problems with not only the deaths of the party, but also being able to maintain damage on both of the bosses. Once one of them falls, then everybody needs to go and gang up on the second one, and eventually they'll both be down and you'll be treated to an awesome loot explosion. The second boss encounter in the Muspelheim raid is with Overseer Slag. For this particular one, the shtick of the arena and the splitting of the party are directly intertwined with one another. The reason being that throughout the arena there are 10 prisoners spread out, and what you need to do is go and defend them. If any of the prisoners end up dying from any of the mobs that are around, then Overseer Slag gains back 10% of his health, and he gains a permanent 5% damage reduction for the rest of the encounter, neither of which are really good. So what ends up happening is the party gets split into people defending the prisoners and those going directly after Slag. For those going and defending the prisoners, the typical split is to have one person defending 1 and 2, one person defending 4 and 5, and those two people each sharing the defense of prisoner number 3, and then you have one person defending 6 and 7, and one person defending 9 and 10, with them trying to watch out for prisoner number 8. The problem with prisoner number 8 is that he's sort of on an island by himself, so it can be difficult to get to if you don't have the exact right character. And as part of that, prisoner number 8 is sort of defended by a floating person from the boss group, because the remaining people, the 6 remaining people, are attacking Slag himself, and one of those people can go and check on prisoner 8 every once in a while to see how it's going. Now, the problem with defending the prisoners is primarily the elite archers. These archers are going to be doing the massive damage that are going to take down the prisoners relatively quickly. All of the other mobs are fairly trash mobs that don't do much damage, but if you don't take down those yellow and blue archers, then you're going to be in big trouble as a defender of the prisoners. If you're fighting Overseer Slag himself, there's really not too much that you need to know. He only has 2 major attacks, one of which is massively telegraphed by a large area of effect ring. It does do a ton of damage, but you do have a decent amount of time to get out of the way. His other major attack is him swinging down his club and just trying to hit people. It's not very much of a big deal. One of the issues, though, is that when he gets down to 75, 50, and 25% of his health, he will summon fire giants at each of the prisoners. It is absolutely vital that these fire giants are taken down very quickly, because they do a ton of damage to the prisoners and they can fairly easily kill anyone or most of them. Not to mention being able to take out the players with one-shot kills. In addition, the Slag team will want to use their ultimates relatively early on, because again, just like with the twins, they'll be able to recharge for the next battle. If you keep up with heavy DPS on Slag himself and have decent defense of the prisoners, then there shouldn't be too many problems with defeating him, and just as with the twins, you are treated to a nice loot explosion. The third boss encounter in the Muspelheim raid is with the Monolith. The first thing that's going to happen is the group will be split into 2 teams of 5, one of which will be going north, the second of which will be going south. What you're going to do is move directly in towards the Monolith and just start wailing on it. You're not going to be doing too much damage because there's a shield around it. After a decent amount of time, not too long, 2 Asgardian heroes are going to go off and start to enchant obelisks to activate them. And they say that after they activate all 6 of these obelisks, then the Monolith shield will be down. So the entire goal for this initial part is, first off, to defend these Asgardian heroes. As long as you are defending them, then they're not going to die. But just like with Overseer Slag, you really need to watch out for the archers. The yellow and blue archers can do a lot of damage to the heroes and eventually take them down. One of the major shticks for this particular battle, especially during this portion, is that when the yellow archers die, they leave behind a giant flame. It's a really big AoE flame that doesn't actually damage you, but what it's used for is very, very important. The Monolith fight has 2 major shticks, both of which are tied to the yellow archers. One of them is a buff that they drop that's called the Demon Soul buff. When you get this, then you grow massively in size, and you can attack the Monolith with impunity and at full damage. You want to save this for your really good burst DPS characters that can do a lot of damage in a very short amount of time, because it doesn't last very long. The second shtick for the Monolith relates to the ring of fire that's left behind by the yellow archers I already mentioned. Periodically throughout this fight, you're going to end up fighting with the fire giants. They're going to spawn somewhat randomly, and occasionally you might get text across the screen that says a fire giant is targeting you. What ends up happening is, if you take those fire giants and bring them through the fire left behind by the yellow archers, they gain a blue ring around them that's very, very distinct, and it starts to spin around them. At this point, the fire giants are able to explode. What you need to do is you need to lead those fire giants over to the Monolith and then defeat them. If you do, then the explosion will take down the Monolith's health. As you go through and do more and more of these fire giants, obviously you're doing more and more damage, even while the Monolith is still shielded. The end game, so to speak, for the Monolith fight is very, very simple. Once the enrage timer reaches 1 minute remaining, the Asgardian heroes will finish with the obelisks, and the shield around the Monolith will go down. When this happens, everybody in the group needs to run to the Monolith and just start wailing on it again with all of the DPS they can muster. The one important note, though, is that you should not use ultimates. Keep in mind that this is with just 1 minute remaining, and since there's only 1 minute left, that means that it's going to be another 10 before your ultimate comes back. And because of that, you just need to go as fast as you can, and if your DPS is high enough as a group, and if you were really diligent with the Demon Soul buffs and getting those giants over there, then you'll be able to take the Monolith down, even if you end up cutting it really close, and sometimes you can even do it after the enraged timer, because keep in mind, all of these mobs are relatively weak, which means that you're not going to be losing too many lives ahead of the enraged timer counting down. But regardless, if you can move fast enough and if you can hit hard enough, you will be treated to another loot explosion.
Logan, personal space. Don't make.
The fourth boss fight in the Muspelheim raid is with the Sisters of Magma. The major shtick for this fight actually starts well before the battle itself even begins. Because there are 3 sisters, you need to split the party into 3 groups. The problem is that each sister is immune to a specific type of damage. The left sister is immune to mental damage, the middle sister is immune to physical damage, and the right sister is immune to energy damage. So what you need to do first is look at your character, know what type of damage you do, and avoid the sister that is immune to that specific damage type. Once everything is figured out, it's time to enter into the instance. Once you're in there, it's actually a fairly simple fight. It's a really basic DPS race. You just need to do a great deal of damage as fast as you possibly can, and in addition, a side note is that your damage numbers will be split into 3, because it's essentially like you're damaging each one of the sisters. The sisters have a couple of fairly simple telegraphed attacks that they utilize, and as long as you're out of the way of the telegraph area, you won't have any problems. But the second shtick of the sisters is one that's actually pretty terrible. Eventually, they're all going to fly up into the air, and bombs are going to start dropping onto the ground. And they look like sort of little lightning orbs, essentially, but on the ground. If you touch one of those or get hit by one, then it is an instant kill. You will just simply be dead. So you need to absolutely avoid all of those at all costs. Once that portion is complete, the sister will come back down and then summon some minor mobs as well as a fire giant. The first thing that you need to do after that is defeat the fire giants. You'll see a counter at the top of the screen that shows how many of the fire giants are still remaining. For every fire giant that is still there, the sisters will have 10% damage reduction, so you need to take them out. After the first round of fire giants are all gone, that's the time for all of the characters to use their ultimates on the sisters. It'll do a decent amount of damage, and you know that the sisters aren't going to be out of reach. As long as you avoid the AoE bombs and make sure that you take out the fire giants quickly, the sisters should really pose no problem, because there's no shtick other than the fact that the party's already split up more and you have to deal with those insta-kill bombs. If you can just keep up the DPS, then you should have no issues because you've already gotten this far. And once again, you have a nice loot explosion that is actually outside of the sisters' main area this time. At long last, we've reached the 5th and final boss of the Muspelheim raid, Surtur himself. So for this one, the first thing to note is that the portal leading to his specific arena will close after 20 seconds once the first person goes inside. Once everybody is inside, there are several things to note. First off is the timer for Surtur is 15 minutes rather than 10 minutes as it was for everybody else. Second, he has several very simple attacks where he just takes his sword and swings it directly down at the ground. The biggest issue with Surtur himself, at least initially, is the one where he stabs the ground with his sword. He will take his sword by the hilt and hold it up to his chest, pause for about 5 seconds, and then stab it down. When he does this, you need to get behind one of the rocky walls that are inside of the arena. It will protect you from this stab, and otherwise you will just die with this insta-kill attack. Very, very unpleasant. At the beginning of this fight, everybody in the raid group should be attacking Surtur with as much DPS as possible. In addition, after his first ground stab, everybody should be using their ultimates again to just stack on the damage as much as they can. Soon after, though, the beginning of the party splitting occurs. In the middle of the arena, a large portal will open up that will suck in any heroes that are standing on it. The idea behind this portal is that it will take characters to go off and fight one of the other 4 bosses in a relatively minor clone form. Now, part of the issue with this is after these bosses are defeated, Surtur gets one of their special abilities that he can then use for the rest of the fight. And these portals themselves occur at 14, 11, 8, and 5 minutes remaining on the Enrage timer. At 14 minutes, you go and fight Slag. Now, there aren't any prisoners to defend, and he's at approximately a quarter of his original health, so it's just a straight-up DPS race. Ideally, you want to have this portal team able to defeat each of these boss groups in time to reach the other portal. If you can't, then you can't, but it is definitely in your best interest to do so. After you defeat Slag, Surtur gains the ability to summon small meteors and also the fire giants that can do a great deal of damage to your heroes. At 11 minutes, the portal in the main arena will lead to a battle with the twins, Lord Brimstone and Lady Hellfire once again. Now, for this particular one, you don't have to bother with the rotation and buff system, but you are still fighting two bosses at the same time. Again, they have reduced HP, but you still have two guys attacking you. And at this point, you probably want to go after Lady Hellfire first, simply because her AoE damage is much greater compared to that of Lord Brimstone. After you have defeated the twins, then Surtur gains the ability to utilize the green and red telegraphed attacks that involve either getting away from your fellow characters or having everybody hug in order to mitigate the damage. At 8 minutes, the portal in the arena will lead to a battle with one of the three Magma sisters. This sister does not have any damage resistance though, so any characters are able to go to this. And just like before, it's the same type of fight where you just need to go and do the DPS and avoid the AoE bombs. Unfortunately, after defeating the sister, Surtur gains the ability to use those AoE bombs, which is absolutely devastating and can be extremely difficult and frequently leads to parties wiping on this battle. Lastly, at 5 minutes, the portal leads to a battle with the Monolith. Similarly to the original fight, you do have to protect an Asgardian hero as they go to the obelisks, but you still have the ability to use the fire giants as explosives, and you also get the buffs that let you do the damage even when the Monolith has its shield up. And just like before with the main battle, after the shield is down, it's a DPS race to take down the Monolith as fast as you possibly can. Once the Monolith is downed, Surtur gains the ability to use a large laser that will destroy some of the rock formations that protect you from his ground stab attack. The Surtur battle is obviously very difficult, but one of the most important things, and arguably more so than with the other bosses, is managing the deaths. More often than not, you will see parties wipe because people are dying too frequently, and this especially happens after the portal with one of the Sisters of Magma, simply because once he gains that AoE bomb that insta-kills anybody, then the party can be in very big trouble. But that said, if you are able to manage those deaths, make certain that you avoid the ground stab, and avoid all of the powers as they come along, make sure that you use your second ultimate when it gets recharged for this fight, then eventually you will succeed, and you'll be treated not only to an awesome motion comic that shows what happens after the defeat of Surtur, but you will also be treated to the largest loot explosion to date in the entire game.
So that's it for my guide on the rating system in Marvel Heroes. I hope that you enjoyed it, but more importantly, I hope that it helps you out for all of your rating experiences in the future. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to put them in the comments for this video, or you can contact me in-game or on the Marvel Heroes forums and ask me any questions about anything I've discussed here or in any of my other videos as well. And with that, once again, I hope you liked this video. If you want to see more like it, I do plenty of Marvel Heroes guides, including weekly patch update notes. You can go ahead and subscribe to my channel, or you can just watch my Marvel Heroes playlist. But regardless, I hope that you enjoy the rating system. I hope that you can go out and beat Surtur, but more importantly, I hope you have fun, and I will see you later.